Hi, everybody. Hi, Joam.
Hello.
It's now already time to show you the 3.14 release, and we have a lot of cool new stuff in there. Joam, what are we going to talk about?
Well, there's a lot of things in 3.14. I mean, first and most is the new design release. We did already 2 videos on that, so we're not going to spend too much time on it specifically, but we're going to use new design, of course, for all of the other demos that we're going to do. Beyond that, we are going to talk a lot about the data dictionary, a very important feature, and a lot of changes left and right. Too many to name at this point, so I would say let's get going.
Yeah, so let's start with the data dictionary. So we have a lot of cool new models, including the data dictionary. What is the data dictionary?
So the data dictionary, as you say, is a new model available in 3.14, and it allows you to add definitions, configurations about your data to BPMN and CMN models. And I built a little demo here. It's not, it's a
Before
small
we
demo,
go
but
into the demo, what is the
yeah.
difference between the data objects and the data dictionary, since we already have something with data?
Yes. Good point. So the data objects are really a representation, a model that configures how you represent your data, whether it's coming from a REST API or whether it's coming from a database or something else. That's a data object. It's like a little wrapper, a layer on top of your data that abstracts it away in BPMN and CMN models. The data dictionary is actually completely something different. It is a sort of contract, and you'll see in the UI later on that it's also called a contract that says, okay, this piece of data should be this type, should be, let's say, an integer, should be something else, and it should have these constraints. For example, it's a number, but it can't be lower than 0, for example. So they're really 2 different things, even if they share, similar namings, so to say. So let me go into my demo. It's a small app, nothing special about that, and I already pre-built a tiny data dictionary. In reality, I imagine that this will be way larger. We have a classic customer object. By the way, Valentin, if you're interested in building this yourself, the 3.14 release also comes with additional documentation to this. So if you go to documentation.flowable.com, you'll see there is a whole bunch of documentation that explains why, for example, data dictionary is good.
So as part of the modeler documentation, since it's a model which we build out, we can now go
Yes.
for the data dictionary, where we then see basically the...
Exactly. So it shows you, all the things that I will show you now quickly, the types, the properties, how you can build all of this. It has a reference guide that shows you how to use the UI and stuff like that. And it also explains how you're going to use this in BPMN and CMN, which I'm going to show you now.
Yeah.
So here, let me all expand them. We've got a customer definition, and the customer has, again, it's quite simple at this point, demoware. It has a name, it has a type, but you can see there is a couple of constraints already on this. So if you, for example, look at this, it has a constraint that says that there's a minimum length. Let's quickly open it. You can see it's a string, so it's textual.
Yeah.
It has a minimum length of 3, for example.
Okay.
So the runtime will actually check this. And the type has something else. Let's quickly check what it is on the tooltip. It has an expression, and the regular expression says it needs to be company or person. And then we link to another type, another
So you
object.
can go ahead and nest basically one data dictionary type in another data dictionary type. So it allows you to also use the address then, for example, inside an, I don't know, location of the company which you have.
Exactly. So the goal really is that on the left-hand side, you see the root types, as we call them. And the root types, they can be reused all across. So I can construct an arbitrary complex nested JSON object, for example, that uses this data definition, this data dictionary definition. The address, as you would expect, is quite simple. It has a street, number, zip code, city, country, with all kinds of constraints on them.
Typical things which you have on address. Okay.
Exactly. And then if I go to the models, let's quickly have a look at the case. It's a very simple case. It does a couple of things. It has a start form. In the start form, we're gathering all of the information for our customer. Then we have a user task that reuses the same start form, basically. I should have renamed that to something else than start form, because it's not only a start form. But the most important part is actually this button here in the toolbar. And this is the data contract. So we have the data dictionary. The data dictionary is standalone. It can be reused across various models. It basically defines this is data and how it should look like. Here, we're actually linking it to a real runtime usage of, in this case, a case model. So we're saying we're using this data dictionary, and it's again very simple here. We have in this particular case model a customer variable that's of type customer, right? You can see I can check that I selected 2 types here.
So you basically say whenever the variable is created, then it needs to be from the type customer.
Exactly.
When it does not exist, what happens then?
If it doesn't exist, well, there's 2 things, right? So if you don't have this data contract, it will be just a variable like in the old days. If it does, from that point on, the runtime engines will actually validate all of the constraints, all of the type definitions that you've configured in your data dictionary. So it will, and I'm just going to show you, right? Let me quickly just show you.
Before you go out there was also the dictionary lookup. What is that?
Oh, that is simply something that you don't need to always go back and forth, because I can imagine that if you're here, you're like, okay, how is this again? That you don't need to go out of this pop-up and need to, this is just a quick handy lookup mechanism there.
That's a read-only view basically from your data dictionary.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
So let me quickly go to, whoops, I was testing something else here. Let me go to Flowable Work. I'm going to create a customer case. I'm going to create, let's say, the Acme. Acme is a customer and it's a company. The street is, let's say, I'm just going to use some random things here. 1, 2, 3. Zip code is, let's say, again, 9876. City is Acme town and Acme country. Here we go. So I created this is all valid data, right? So I'm just creating a valid kind of customer object. Again, because there is a data contract, actually, as you can already see here in inspect, the engines already saw that this is something that needs to be validated at runtime. So if I actually check my data.
Before, when we just created that variable, it would show up here as a JSON, and now it's a data dictionary, which means actually it is checked. So with that, we can even see directly that our contract is enforced.
Yeah, exactly. So if we try that now, right? So if you now say change customer data, and there is now an open task, change customer data, I'm going to make inspect smaller again. One of the things that was there was that the street needs to be set. So if I just remove that, right, it needs to have a minimum length of 1 character. If I try to complete this, and you can see that there is now an error explaining that we have an invalid value for our street field in the address nested object. We expected a minimum of 1 character. So let's fix this. Let's make this again.
There you can actually see basically that this is an error message which is coming from the backend, since it's a red error bar, while you can also enable front-end validations for that as well.
Correct. Yeah, that would be a whole different thing, right? I could build a front-end validation here to validate this, but the cool thing about the data dictionary is that it guarantees consistency of your data. So the backend, the server, doesn't accept invalid data, and that's really the one of the biggest positives about the data dictionary is that you cannot have wrong data. And as you know, these days data is so important that having correct data is hard. This is helping you do that. What I did while we were talking is I changed the street again to a value, and I added a negative number here in the data dictionary. We actually said that the number should be having a minimum of 1 in this case. So this should fail. So if we try this again, we get an error. We can't complete this task, right? So it must be greater than or equal than 1. You see that this helps you to build good data that is correct. So this was in a nutshell, basically quickly showing the data dictionary feature. There's a lot more to it. Go and check out the documentation, right? And play around with it and let us know what we can enhance.
So that is really cool already. And we can not only use that in user-driven things, we can also use that when we are talking to an API, when we have a script and so on. So that variable is always basically of the data dictionary type.
Correct.
Which I think is important, and we should mention that as well.
Yes, very good point. It's actually implemented on the lowest level of the Flowable engine. So that means that whenever you touch a variable in any kind of circumstance, this logic, this new kind of data dictionary logic kicks in, and it validates all the things against your data dictionary definition, which is pretty cool. And of course, this is the first release. There's many ideas of what we want to do with the data dictionary in the future, like making sure that you can do mandatory things on a case start, process start. And the other thing is that once you have this information, you can actually start to analyze how data flows through different cases, different processes, different services, which is a very powerful feature for working with data in general.
Cool. Thank you, Joam. And everybody else, please try it out. Then we are going to continue with the next topic, which is data objects. Okay, let's get into data objects, which is actually our next topic. Joam, what are the news around data objects?
So one of the things that customers have asked for quite some time is support for OR queries, which makes sense, right? If you're querying data, you definitely want to do that.
To do a step back, you have had the possibility to search basically in your data objects, for example, with data tables or within a select. And previously, you just have add ands in there, so you could add multiple fields, and it is doing an and around those.
Yeah, and if you're interested in that, and that's actually also what I have here on the screen, is we've did a 4-part series of movies, I think a year ago or something.
You mean you are, and we are going to link that over here.
All right, thank you. Yes, we're building this quite advanced example. It's a patient kind of case management system where we're storing consultations, and we're keeping some data about every consultation that we have with every patient. So without further ado, let me show you what we've done. So basically, I've taken this example that you can see in that last movie and basically enhanced it here at the bottom with a new operation that uses the new OR support. So if I open up this operation, you can see I have 2 filter parameters. One is just a general input, textual, and a patient ID.
So that's the input data basically for our search query, which we then can use inside our filter definition.
In this query, exactly. So this is the new query builder in new design. So basically what you're saying here is that the patient ID needs to equal something. And at the same time, one of these things we're going to OR, which is the summary, needs to, like ignore case, a certain the search input, and a description. So we're going to search into our database into all kind of things, all kind of summaries and descriptions about all the consultations that we've done for this particular
So we just have one input field, but we are searching both fields, and since only one of them needs to be applying, we can do that.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly. So that's the service. So if we now go into the form, which I already have open here, the page, which looks a lot like the form, of course. The page is quite simple. It's the search is at the top here. This is the search text. Here I can just type like, my leg hurts or whatever. And here we can select the patient. Now the interesting part is, of course, when we link it to our service model. So let me show you that. So here we linked it to our consultation service or data object. And we use this new operation, and we mapped simply the search field, and we mapped the data object select, and then we said we want to have the ID mapped into the patient ID. So
since quite the patient is the entire basically object which is coming back, we're just getting the identifier from that.
Exactly. Here we simply did a generic find operation for the patient, restoring the patient you select. And that's it. The other thing that we've done is the only change I made here is we configured the columns. So we're going to show the patient first, last name, the last time the timestamp of the consultation, and then the actual summary and description. So let's have a look how that looks like in reality. So here in work, let's go. You can see that these are the pages that we had in the demo before, a generic patient overview. The main details view of every patient and what their consultations were. And now we have this new consultation search, which is part of the app that I enhanced. So as you can see, by default, it's searching in everything, right? I didn't constrain my filter yet. So let's say if I want to search for something.
We did not provide input parameters, it's just showing us everything. Since all of that is a match.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So again, I removed my search again. You see it matched everything. If I now add my search criteria, you see it now give me, Jane, John, Jane, Jimmy. They all at one point, either in the summary or the description, there was something about stomach problems. So you can see that this, if I want to filter it now, because we also have the patient ID in that query, I can say Jane, for example.
And
you
then
can
we
see that
see
the
everything
table.
with stomach and
Exactly.
Jane for the consultations.
Exactly. So, it's a really powerful feature that opens up a lot of cool stuff query-wise, and, how you can find your data and display your data, in reality. So
Yeah.
I'm
That
very
looks
impressed with it.
really, really cool. And it sounds like you need to do now another movie for your YouTube series
Yeah,
about how to create that app that we have that covered
that's a
as
fair
well.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
So thank you very much. And with that, I think the next topic is going to be the event registry.
Mhm.
So for the event registry, we already supported a way of different channels in there for receiving and actually sending events, including, for example, Kafka, JMS, RabbitMQ. Joam, we also have something new which is in there. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So this is the REST endpoint, the REST inbound basically endpoint. It's a typical way if you want to hook up different services together that they expose something called a webhook. For example, if you think about GitHub or whatever, if you want to integrate with it, you can expose a certain URL where you can post information to, and then you can act on it. Now, of course, we've had the event registry, as you said, for Kafka, for JMS, and all the others. So it's a really powerful mechanism to enhance your BPMN or CMN models with, do something if data arrives at this channel. And now we have a way to do that over HTTP REST. So I have already created a simple app. I create a new channel. I selected REST. There's not much to it, honestly, beyond the fact I have to select REST. I have to select, of course, which users are allowed to post to this. So if you do the REST request, you're going to have to put the user credentials into the request, because otherwise you could simply, and if anybody would be able to do this, that would be very secure. And the only thing that I changed is here the pipeline.
Instead of the users, I could also use the groups basically, so that I have both possibilities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, of course, the user is now, because it's demo-aware, so it's quite simple for me to just pick the admin user. But of course, typically you'd pick a group or groups to say these people are allowed to do
I mean,
REST.
for a REST webhook, it might be even fair to just say one specific technical user who is allowed to do that.
That's going to be the typical setup, I assume. Exactly. So I was saying that in the pipeline, I had one thing. I selected the webhook event. The webhook event is something very simple. If I open up this event, it has no real data, just for demo here. It's got an ID, a name, and a value, all of them strings. Then I have a case. Let's go to the case. Here we go. So I have a case that once I start it, I'm going to listen to this particular webhook event. And whenever.
And that is actually the same now when you would listen for a Kafka or RabbitMQ event or whatever, basically.
Or email, right? I mean, we also have an email channel. So whatever your data is coming from, we abstract this away in an event. So if you're modeling CMN, BPMN, you don't need to care about where this data is coming from. It just comes from somewhere. In this case, it comes over REST, but it doesn't really matter. The handling is going to be exactly the same as any other event. So what we've done here, let me quickly show you this. I've linked it, of course, to this event, and I mapped the data as a transient variable, because I don't need to really persist them, into my case. And then what I do here is I simply start a new process. The process is extremely silly. It just has a task, but I am using the data from the event to make some, dynamic names.
On the case, you have the passing in those variables basically into your process.
If I go to the tab of
data, even persisted inside the process.
Correct. So here the event name is mapped into the event. I could use a different name here, but I use the same name. Why? Because I simply use the variable assist, right? If you do control space here, you get the variable assist, and I just picked it here. So in the case, it's transient because there, I don't want to store it. Also, it would be overwritten every time otherwise. But in the process, obviously, in the single instance, I want to have it persisted. So you can pick and choose really here. So let me show you how that looks like. I already deployed it to Flowable Work. I need to create a case, right? Because we want to receive this event. I also could have done an event to start the case instance or start the process instance, but here I modeled it in such a way that it needs to exist first.
Do we actually have a correlation on our event that we can go ahead and say it must be a specific case? Or
I didn't model it now. I didn't model it like this right now. Now it's just going to be all the events that come in. But of course, you can say match it to a certain piece of data in your case or process and say if the customer ID, for example, matches this event, data ID, then I need to send it into this particular instance. Of course,
Yeah.
that's going to be the realistic setup of this, which is
Yeah.
a good point. So I have a case. There's nothing going on right now. I mean, really just
that's
a
inside
simple,
the task. There we go. Yeah.
a simple case. If I now open up Postman, this is the endpoint. I don't know if you saw it, but in my channel there was actually already a kind of a help text that described that endpoint. So I got it running on my local machine. My webhook channel key is just called webhook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send in just John Doe. So
ID,
if I send
name,
this,
okay.
yeah, exactly. And if I now just click back and forth, you see it's received an event, created the process, right, as part of the case. So, which is pretty cool. If I do it again, let's say I now do some different data.
Yeah.
And say it's Jane Doe. You will see, send it. Now go back and forth. You can see there is now actually a second task for Jane Doe, similar like John Doe, being created. So you can see how this mechanism is a very powerful mechanism to send in arbitrary data into case instances, process instances, and to enrich your models with all various kind of integrations. Because most products, they have some sort of REST interface anyway. So hooking these together has become way easier now.
Okay, with that, we can basically now hook up our webhook endpoint to Flowable and have a callback where before we basically either needed to build our own endpoint or we needed to do polling.
Correct.
Cool, then our next topic is going to be the service registry. Now, the service registry was already available in Flowable since a while, and we were able to use it to execute, for example, scripts or REST requests or expressions within our process or case. Now, with 3.14, we introduced another way to use those service registries.
Yeah, that is correct. It's something that customers have asked for a while. It's calling services in a form, and I built a small demo around that. So let me show you. It's here. What I have here is basically a very simple process. And as you said, we already had the capability to call service models in a BPMN process, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Now, the service itself is nothing fancy. It's just a very simple script one. And it does one thing, which is it takes input, and it's simply with Groovy is going to make an uppercase version of it. Again, demoware, but you can imagine that if you're calling a third-party API, this can be way more fancy, of course.
Yeah, so a really simple use case, but we could have a REST call here as well, which is executing something and so on.
Exactly. So what we're doing here is we're basically, let me just show you again, mapping it, linking it here to the service model, mapping it into the output, binding it to the text, which is in my start form. I'll show you that in a second. And then I've got a user task. Let me show you the form where I'm putting that output. So whatever I put into the input will then be uppercased here on this form. I've got a field here, new input, and this is the new service button. So let me show you how it looks like. As you would expect, I need to bind it
to the same service model which we have had before. So
exactly the same. So no, I linked it here to the service, and I passed the new input text field into the parameter of the service, and the uppercase text, what comes back, will then be bound to new output. And as you probably already saw, new output is here on the screen.
That means the script is also executed in your backend. It's checked if the authentication of the user is allowed to execute that, and so on.
As you can see here on the screen, you can actually configure that. So now I put it, or I think this is the default. It's just any Flowable user of the system. But of course, you can constrain this to particular groups, to particular users, and basically say these can call this service. Because it's a backend call, right? So you can do some serious things here if you're not thinking about this use case. So let me show you how that looks like. I'm going to publish it quickly. Here we go. Then let's go to work. Let's try to find it. Here it is. That's the process. So this is the input, right? Which I'm going then to send into the first task into a service. So let's just say hello world, lowercase. We expect it to come back uppercase. So you see, that service call, execute the script, and we got it back. So if we now say hello Valentin in lowercase, as we now press the button and everything should work. you see it comes back in uppercase. So again, the demo doesn't, it's quite simple demo, but you can see the power here of calling any arbitrary service model that you have already created, that you might be using in different models, and use them in a form to do, all kind of crazy stuff.
That's really cool, since it gives you the capability of basically using the services which you already built out for your backend, no matter what they are doing, also to use them inside your front end if you want to, but you are not required to.
Exactly.
That is really cool. So let's move to the next topic, which is Flowable Control. Now, there are a lot of improvements inside Flowable Control. Joam, would you like to show us some of them?
Yeah, there's many minor things. It's really hard to name them all. So I'm going to focus on the big ones. One of the things that people have asked us many times is that sometimes you have a hierarchy of cases, processes, tasks, and whatnot, and you want to just go through them, see how they're structured, right? And so we've added that to Flowable Control in 3.14. Let me just quickly show you how that looks like. I prepared a root case instance. Here it is. So here in the root case, I'll click it. And then in the details, there's now an instance hierarchy tab. You can see that it's quite simple, as you can see here, just a couple of things. But I can already see there's one link to a BPMN process instance.
Okay, and the task as well. So you have those two.
Because tasks are very crucial to most of our use cases. We've decided to put them into it, even though they're not really instances such as case and processes. We just, people do a lot with user tasks.
And you also see the state in which they are and the activity ID. Basically, when you would like to go back to Flowable Design, you can easily search for them.
Correct. So, now at the second layer, I think I can go down one more layer, and here we are, at the grandchild level. You can also see that here at the header, I can go up back to my, parent or the parent of my parent. So, just quickly go through it. So a little feature, but, something that saves quite a bit of time in real life usage.
Yeah, and we also have a zooming capability now for the diagram, I can see.
Yes. So if I take any, let me just quickly take a more interesting one. Let's say the patient case. If you can zoom here, which you couldn't do before, right? You can zoom, you can scroll around. So that's something that just is very useful to have in this kind of particular view. Yeah.
That's really nice.
The other feature worth mentioning is that we now have in the cluster view here, role-based access kind of checks. So before, if you had a user in Flowable Control, you could configure all kind of roles already with things you could see or couldn't see, or even certain buttons you could press or not press based on the different roles. And now there is also a role being added here when you create clusters. So for the people that don't know, in Flowable Control, you can manage multiple different setups of runtime Flowable installations. So for one control, you can swap to Flowable Work setup A, or a cluster, right? One or more instances of Flowable Work working together, another cluster for another use case, and simply swap it, using this drop-down.
Assuming, for example, I have a dev, a QA, and a production environment, I could now go ahead and restrict, for example, the access to the QA environment to a certain group of people and use for all of that the same Flowable Control instance.
Exactly. Which before wasn't possible, but now you can give, the person doing QA access to that particular cluster, and that cluster only, and avoid that anything can be done on production. So very useful feature, I would say.
Yeah, that is really nice. Now, as you mentioned before, we also have a few minor changes, like in the jobs, which we can already see. We can now also see the job owner and when it was logged. So that allows us...
Which is hard to demo, right? I mean, if I have a job, it's immediately processed. But this request comes from people that run millions of jobs, per hour. And if the job queue gets filled, and then you're booting up, different instances, for example, in Kubernetes, for some reason, the pod goes down, another pod comes up. Sometimes it happens that that log owner, needs to be checked because things need to be moved. Well, there's now a way to do that through Flowable Control.
You would need to click here then on the job, and then on the details of the jobs, you would see that.
Exactly, which is really hard to, fake in a working system. But you could then say, move this to somewhere else, basically. Yeah.
Then stopping of the housekeeping ones is also another addition which was done here, as well as master data management. So you can go ahead and upload, for example, an updated set of master data.
Correct. The housekeeping is an interesting one. So again, really hard to show in a running system, but if you have a lot of data and you trigger the housekeeping, and sometimes you say, oh, I put the wrong parameters in, right? I put the batch size too high or something else. Then you can stop that run. It gets processed, and you can schedule another run to do, the proper thing, so to say.
Cool. And with that, actually, we already reached our other improvements part of this release video. So there are a few more improvements, and I think the first one which we are going to talk about is about app level key value constants. What are those, Joram?
Yeah, so basically, as the name implies, so we call them app variables. On the app level, you can define now variables that are shared between all of your models, but also at runtime. So for example, if I go here to the tab of the variables, you see I just have some dummy data here, a string and an integer with some standard value. These are now managed on the app level, which means that if I go now into my BPMN process, for example, I can now actually, as you can see here in the expression of my service task, reference them at runtime with the value that's being configured.
So you always use flow app, that's a static identifier from Flowable, and then the name of your variable afterwards.
Correct. And the cool thing is that I can have hundreds, thousands of these instances running. At this point, I can then go into control, change the value for this particular app variable, and all next instances will then use a new value that I configured, which is a cool kind of concept.
That is really cool. Now, the next on my list is task output mapping. What do we have around that?
Okay. It's quickly explained. So if, for example, I take this user task and I go and have a look at the input-output data mappings, basically, it allows me to say either on the input, on the output, or both to have an allowed or a blocked list, right? Where I can configure variables.
The input mapping was already there before, where you were able to restrict that variable are exposed to the form. And with the output, we can now basically make read-only forms by not allowing to override certain variables.
Yeah. So basically, you can, allowed, you can say these are the ones allowed, which makes sense if you have a small set of variables. But often it's mostly that you want to block something. You want to do like, okay, these variables, these should not be able to be changed within this task, right? You can show them. You can even allow them to change them, even though it wouldn't have an impact. But definitely the engine, the backend, should not accept any change whatsoever to this particular variable here. So that's what
so the user can't override them anymore.
Correct.
That's also really nice. Now, I think the next point is going towards forms. There I have on my list basically the symbol for number components.
Yeah, that's a quick one to demo. I got a little form here. It's a number field, and in the number field, I can now here on the rendering tab, I put now a prefix here, which is basically the euro sign. I can also add a suffix. I'll show that in a second. And basically, when that gets rendered, I'm going to use a preview here. Right? It renders, the euro sign. Now, if I would put put that same thing here, let me go back and put the euro sign for the suffix.
Yeah, now we have both, so now we see it on
exactly.
on both sides, which makes sense.
So a small thing, but something that, actually quite a lot of customers ask for to kind of give more meaning to the number fields.
Well, I think a few releases ago, we introduced the business statuses for cases and processes.
Correct.
Now, for cases, it really makes sense to use milestones, basically, to change actually the status, since at this point you achieved something. And I think you are going to show us now that this is possible with 3.14.
Yeah. Now, this is, of course, a very simple case, but it shows the concept. So what I've done here is I've got, on the root level, I configured 3 different statuses, business statuses, onboarding active, inactive. And normally what you go through, but this is, of course, a simple demo, is you have stages and you move from one stage to the other and move into different phases, different kind of business status of your case. Now, what I've done here is something very simple. I got a task A. When it reaches the milestone here, actually what happens is that, you can see here, that I've reached the business status active whenever I reach that, and it's going to use the ones that I created around. Of course, you can see it takes an expression, so I can change this to whatever actually I want, but I can now say it's onboarding, it's active, and actually that has an impact on work, or also the REST APIs, of course, if you're not using the work API. For example, this one here, you can see I already run it. I did task A, and you can see that it shows status active, which is a little indicator, but it has often a big business impact into, what's the current state of my case.
That is really cool, especially because it makes it way easier to change the business status. Before, you just used an expression to do the same. Now you don't need to recall the expression. You can just use a milestone. And with that, I think we already reached the end of the features, but there's one more thing where actually I also worked on, and that is inside the Flowable Cloud. You can now go ahead and do training.
So I've actually logged into my Flowable Cloud account, and you can see there is now an e-learning section here. Let me just click it.
Yes. So now here in the e-learning, you have my first Flowable app course where you can go through an, I would say, Flowable training and gets really started with Flowable, and you can watch videos like that video here, for example, where I'm explaining what the training is. And that is actually then followed by, in the next step, also quizzes. You see them on the left side with question marks. And in addition to that, you have hands-on exercises. So you can really try that out directly in here. And all of that, you have a video and you have a short description, basically, with the entire content.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I can just see there's a lot of work that must have gone into this. Crazy. Nice. Cool. There was, we just briefly went over the other improvements. There's a ton more of improvements. Also technical ones that are not really demoable. For example, all products have moved to React 18, which opened up new capabilities. Behind the scenes, we also using different HTTP clients now. There was only Apache client before. We're using now some Spring clients, also some more async APIs. All of that is documented in the Flowable 3.14 release notes. So if you go there, go to documentation.flowable.com, you can see there's a lot of information about what is new in this particular release. If there is any migration, how do you migrate, and stuff like that. So, have a look there. There's a lot of information because, there is, as you could see, a lot of things in 3.14. So, that's it for me, Valentin.
And as always, we recommend everybody to try it out. So download the release, download the enterprise trial, and then I would say get your hands dirty.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joram. Thank you, everybody.